Hello, friends. Happy December. Happy holidays. I hope your final days of the year are going well. I thought that I would be filming my favorite reads of 2025 video this week, but I ended up reading so many five-star books in December that I frankly just need more time to think about it. So I'm going to be filming my December wrap up instead while I mull over what my actual favorites are for the year 2025. I would say my reading is usually pretty eclectic month to month, but I feel that this month there was even less internal order than usual because I was mostly just trying to catch up on books that I wanted to read before the year was over. A couple of those books are books that I had flagged in the video where I built a TBR from books on a couple of the best books of the year so far lists that came out in like June or July. And the only two books from that TBR that I hadn't read yet were Searches, Selfhood in the Digital Age by Vahini Vara and Exit Zero by Marie-Helene Bertino. And for some reason, I just felt so committed to actually fitting these in this year. And I am glad I did because I think the longer I would get away from 2025, the longer I would allow these books, which have a little less hype, to slip through the cracks. And Searches, especially, is a book that I think I will be thinking about for a long time. This is a nonfiction essay collection written by tech journalist and fiction writer Vahini Vara, and it's about how technology has become incorporated into our lives at every level. I find it a very difficult book to describe because it is really structurally innovative. It is partly a memoir. It's about Vara's childhood and coming of age in the 80s and 90s, her early experiences with AOL Instant Messenger and Facebook and Instagram and these other social media websites, and then her eventual break into the world of tech journalism, where I believe she covered the Facebook beat for the Wall Street Journal for a long time. And the memoir portion of the book is coupled with more classic journalistic writing about the history of these big tech corporations like Meta, like Amazon, like Google, like in ways that she is particularly experienced in writing about these companies. And then the book is also very much an exploration of the harms, conveniences, and unfolding impact of AI and large language models. So in 2023, Vara co-wrote a short story about grief over her sister's death. She co-wrote it with GPT-3 in a pretty provocative piece, and that story is in this book. And the chapter that moved me the most was about Vara's personal history related to learning languages, which she wrote in Spanish as she was learning the language in Spain on her husband's sabbatical. And that story is presented side by side with an English translation generated by Google Translate. And I think in a world where it seems like everyone's position on how and whether we should use large language models and AI is very polarized, I thought this was very thought-provoking in the hazy middle. She talks about the ways in which the average consumer is complicit, but she also couples that with the way that these companies operate and the way they make the convenience that they offer so undeniable. I think this is a great nonfiction book to partner with The Dream Hotel by Layla Lalami. I kept thinking back to that book as I was reading this one because the slow burn of the convenience factor that makes us so willing to be surveilled and so willing to ignore the fact that these companies are really eroding boundaries that previously existed in our lives. Both of these books talk about that a lot, and I appreciate that Searches is so ambiguous and it feels more balanced in the way it talks about technology than a lot of the discourse I've seen recently. I just really liked it. I will be thinking about Searches a lot, and I think it was really unique in the way that it was structured. Exit Zero, however, I thought was ambiguous in a way where I appreciated the ambiguity less so. So this is a short story collection by Marie Helene Bertino. She notably wrote Beautyland, which was a popular literary sci-fi novel that came out last year. And I have not read Beautyland yet, but I thought this might be an interesting place to start instead. And it was. I did like this short story collection. I just didn't love it. Bertino has this very spare, dry writing style that, when coupled with the surreal elements of these short stories, I found it sometimes moving, but sometimes difficult to get my footing or figure out what the takeaway from a given story is. One of the stories I found very moving was the title story, which is the story of a woman cleaning the house of her recently deceased estranged father, who unexpectedly left her a unicorn to take care of. The story is very weird, but it kind of caught me off guard in the full spectrum of emotions it pulled out of me. Another story that I enjoyed, surprising no one, is a vampire story called Viola in Midwinter. And it's about a vampire living in upstate New York and reckoning with her immortality. What I liked about the collection is that the ideas go in really surprising and unexpected directions. I think even where the premise is kind of straightforward, she mines non-obvious themes from that material. And more often than not, the premise is not straightforward. And that's sometimes where I struggle, because each story is really quite brief, and I feel that often by the time I got a handle on what was even happening, it didn't really give me time to breathe with that knowledge. And I feel like I'm a more generous reader than most in that respect. So I don't know who exactly I would recommend this collection as a whole to, besides like people that already like Marie Helene Bertino and really like speculative literary fiction. But I am intrigued enough now to possibly go back and read Beautyland, and I will be on the lookout for her other works that come out in the future. Some of the themes that seem to appear again and again in Exit Zero were parent-child relationships and estrangement and loss. And as random as my reading selections were this year, that was really a through line. Parent-child relationships and loss were a big through line in my reading. So for example, one of the books I finished earlier in the month was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I picked this book up in anticipation of watching the movie adaptation directed by Chloe Zhao. It is about Shakespeare's marriage to Anne, or Agnes, and the death of their son Hamnet, and the possible connections Hamnet's death had to the creation of the play Hamlet. Shakespeare himself is decentered for the most part. He is never named in the book, but he's referred to by a title. At first he's the Latin tutor, and then he's the husband. And I will say that I struggled with this book in the beginning because it's written very lyrically, which isn't a problem, but also Shakespeare's wife Agnes is cast as this witchy medicine woman with the powers of divination, and I didn't really love the use of magical realism here. In essence, it just created this feeling of distance from the subject. I just felt very distant from this book, and I was struggling with that. But when tragedy strikes and when the grief hits, the portrayal of the grief over a young child, not only by his mother and father, but by the other family members, was just so raw and devastating for me that at that point I was bought in. Whenever I thought I was safe, there would be a single sneaky little line that would just catch me off guard again, and I would be weeping. And so I also think that the movie did a really good job of adapting the book and really maintaining the same sense of pace and the same sense of dread. At the end of the movie, there's a needle drop moment that I thought was kind of manipulative when I was watching it in the theater, but I did weep in the movie as well, and I think a lot of people did. That's a movie where at the end, everyone's just kind of like still sitting in their seat because you can't like just leave the theater immediately. So I really enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed the movie. The criticisms I have of the movie are mainly the same criticisms that I have of the book, so I think that that's fine. Several other books I read this month dealt more so with the death of a parent. Firstly, I read This Is the Only Kingdom by Jakira Diaz. This is a book that came out earlier this year, and I picked it up at the Wisconsin Book Festival a couple of months ago. It's a family saga, or maybe a coming-of-age story set primarily in Puerto Rico. I would say it primarily centers a mother-daughter relationship, the mother's name being Mari Carmen and the daughter's name being Nena. Nena's father, Ray, was a bit of a complicated Robin Hood figure before he was murdered when Nena was young. And in terms of what I thought of the book, I appreciated the swings this book was making. This book really packs in a lot of social issues. It touches on class and color and addiction and sexuality and all of these things and the way they intertwine, but it didn't really hit the emotional highs that I wanted it to. But it's not a bad read. I think especially if you're looking for really multifaceted Puerto Rican representation. And then I also read King of Ashes by S.A. Cosby. I picked this up off of the Goodreads Choice Awards in the Best Mystery Thriller category. This was my first S.A. Cosby, but I knew he wrote Southern noir crime fiction, and that interested me more than most of the other books in that category. And I did enjoy the noir of it all. Our main character, Roman, returns to his Virginia hometown from New York City after his father suffers an accident that puts him in a coma. Upon arriving, Roman finds out that his younger brother, Dante, is in a lot of trouble with a local gang, and his sister, Nevaeh, is under a lot of stress from running the family crematorium business herself. There is also this mystery around their mother who disappeared years ago, and whether their father killed her and hid it by means of his crematorium business. And this really ends up being a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Roman wants to protect his family and fix things for his family, but he is also a power-hungry dude, and the way the violence and the betrayal escalates over the course of the book was really gripping. For a book in a genre that is really not for me, I thought this was a pretty good pull. Continuing on our theme of parent-child relationships, I finished Crying in H Mart just this morning. This, if you're not familiar with it already, this is a memoir written by Michelle Zauner, the face of the band Japanese Breakfast. I'm wearing a Japanese Breakfast merch t-shirt right now. And in this book, she works through her relationship to her mother and her Korean heritage in the wake of her mother's death to cancer. So I am a fan of Japanese Breakfast, the band, and I remember reading Michelle Zauner's essay with the same name that appeared in, I think, the New Yorker back in 2018. All that to say that I have been meaning to get around to this memoir for a very long time, and I'm so glad that I finally did. I think it depicts a particular kind of grief that comes from losing a mother when you're young and the feelings associated with not being able to see that relationship develop into older age, like that very specific relationship and how it develops into older age. I lost my mother when I was 13 in circumstances that were quite different, not related to cancer, but it definitely hit me to see Zauner working through those same feelings of loss in this book. And because Zauner lost her mother to cancer, there's also this very raw depiction of the realities of cancer treatment and palliative care that I think is really powerful. But Zauner is also approaching this from the lens of being half Korean and losing some of her previous access to that Korean heritage. I think Korean food and Korean culture has blown up globally in recent years, but that was not always the case. And it was interesting and therapeutic to read through how Zauner processed her loss through cooking and through connecting with the remaining family on her mom's side of the family. Really, I think the specificity around her Korean identity is what makes this memoir stand out from other grief memoirs, but I think a lot of people will get a lot out of this book, and I can see why it was so popular. My next book provided some much-needed levity and coziness to my reading this month. This was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I read We Solved Murders by Osmond earlier this year, and I watched the Thursday Murder Club movie on Netflix earlier this year. So I pretty much knew what I was getting into with this one, and that's why I read it. I think that Osmond gets the characters and the amount of humor and sentiment just right so that I still actually care about what happens, which I find isn't always the case when it comes to books that are branded as cozy. That said, I don't have a lot more to say about this one because it was definitely my most brain off read this month, but I really enjoyed it and it was exactly what I needed when I read it. And I'm excited to read more of that series and more of Richard Osman in general. And finally, I'll briefly touch on the two series I continued reading this month. I read On the Calculation of Volume 2 this month. So in this series, our main character, Tara, is stuck in a Groundhog Day time loop, and this book picks up as she begins her second year in this loop. The first book was kind of a meditation on her relationship with her husband and their increasing distance. This book is more so a meditation on seasons and traditions and time as Tara starts to travel outside of her hometown more to seek different seasons where she can in November. So this book is just as quiet and meditative as the first book. So it won't sell anyone, I don't think, who didn't like the first book. But I actually enjoyed this second book a little bit more than the first book, just because I think I was more open to being in that meditative mode while I was reading it this time around. And I am now very much looking forward to book 3. And the final book that I'm actually still in the middle of is Scales of Gold by Dorothy Dunnett, book 4 of the House of Nicola series. It is virtually impossible to talk about this book without spoiling the previous parts of the series at this point. But in this book, we are traveling to Africa, and I am very intrigued by the mix of characters we have joining him and their various interests. So I'm still working through that series, still very much enjoying it. And there were 3 remaining movies that I watched this month that I'll touch on briefly. Wicked or Good, I thought was fine. I appreciate that they tried to beef up the material in the second act, but I really kind of think that this should have just been one movie. And the new songs that they created for this movie were not remarkable in any way, I don't think. But with all of that, it was still somehow better than my low expectations for it, so it was fine. And The Housemaid I also watched. It also exceeded my low expectations for it. I had not read the book, so I wasn't totally sure what to expect, but it ended up being really campy and fun. I watched it in a very packed theater on Christmas Day with a friend, and it got a lot of laughter in the theater for as dark as it is. And I am still not impressed by Sydney Sweeney as an actress, but I am continually impressed by Amanda Seyfried. And then Marty Supreme is, I think, up there with Hamnet in Best Picture contention, but I only watched it yesterday and I'm still kind of trying to work through what I thought of it. It's about a very unlikable, narcissistic star tennis table player. Timothée Chalamet was objectively great in it, and I think really all of the performances and the casting choices were really spot on. I thought it was very funny, but I'm confused about the message of the end of the movie and how we're supposed to be receiving it. I think maybe because I was not ever really rooting for Marty as I was watching this movie, and maybe I was meant to be rooting for him more than I was, because I find the ending and what it is meant to represent very perplexing. I don't want to spoil anything, so if you've watched the movie, feel free to sound out your thoughts in the comments and we can chat about it, but I'm just curious if other people are as confused about the ending as I am. I haven't done a lot of reading on it yet, but I probably will, because it was a good movie overall. It was really good. I just don't really know what to think of the ending. And that is all I have for my December wrap up. And this is probably my last monthly wrap up for the foreseeable future. I said this in my channel goals video for next year, but I do think I'm going to move towards doing these wrap-up style videos much more infrequently, maybe quarterly, but I might experiment with putting out more individual review videos for books and movies that I want to talk about more in the moment. I think that might be a good compromise, but let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I hope you all have a wonderful new year.